great to be here. It's great to be back in Arizona. It almost seems like this campaign that's ongoing started here in Arizona, and I'm very delighted to meet so many new people and see some old friends, because this is certainly a state and an area that loves liberty, loves the Constitution, and would love to see the day when we shrink the size of government. Yeah. The campaign has not been going on all that long, certainly less than 6 months, but it has been going very well. And I'm the first one to confess that I was probably the most reluctant to get involved, but I was encouraged by many people like yourselves, friends and family. Matter of fact, my wife has been the one that has encouraged me the most. A lot of people worry about, does she support me? And she was more encouraging than I was myself. And I was always reluctant, not being positive that I am the best messenger for our freedom philosophy, and also whether or not there would be supporters out there, believing that, you know, if you make an effort and you come up real short, it sort of makes it look like there aren't enough people out there supporting these views. But I have to tell you, in the last 6 months, I have been pleasantly surprised. There's a lot of people like you out there, and the numbers are growing by leaps and bounds, and it's been going quite well. I do have to confess that although we have a very good campaign organization, it's still very, very small, and we have some shortcomings. And the growth of the campaign, I wish we could take all the credit for it, but somehow or another, this campaign is growing by leaps and bounds on its own. It's sort of like spontaneously growing, which is very encouraging. And to me, it tells us all that we're a lot further along than I suppose we were 6 months ago, believing that there were just a few of us. Because I remember very clearly back in the 1950s and the 1960s, first getting interested in the ideas of political economy and economics per se, not with much intent of getting involved in electoral politics. But it was very difficult back then to find literature. It was very difficult to find good books. And the education we all got came from our public schools, it came from our government, it came from television. But they never talked about, you know, what the true principles of this country really were, what the Constitution meant, and which direction we were going in. But today, I think things are so much different, and the growth of our movement is so much better. I think the internet is a tremendous help for this. I think the education available to us, whether it's on radio, talk shows, and magazines and newspapers, that is really caught fire. And this to me is very, very encouraging. The most significant thing that I have noticed is the campaign on the number of people who have joined us. Many of them are very young people. They're teenagers and in their 20s, and I thought, well, this is exciting. There were a few of us in our organizations over the years that used to kid ourselves, and we say, well, you know, we have those individuals who are getting up there in age, and they remember a better America. They remember what it was like when people assumed responsibility for themselves, when you had sound money and limited government, much more so than today. So we kept saying, what's going to happen when the older people all die out? Will the ideas be there? Let me tell you, they're going to be there, because this campaign is very, very much involved with a great number of young people, and I think we should really applaud that. The efforts so far have been, you know, difficult at times. I'm still, you know, in the U.S. Congress. I assume a lot of responsibility there. I do miss some votes, but I try to miss very, very few. I was there this week voting. I left there yesterday and went into Kansas City. and then came down here. And I'm anxious to get home this evening because I like to take off Sundays and be home with my family. And as you know, we have a large family. It's going to get larger this week. We're going to have our 18th grandchild this week. And but tomorrow will be a special day because there's more than one father in our family. We have quite a few fathers in our family. But we will have our 18th grandchild this week, and this will be a special day for us. But nevertheless, a lot of people, and so many of you have already thanked me for what I'm doing, but I have to thank you for what you're doing because I get the encouragement from you. If there weren't people like you to encourage me in my efforts, there would be no campaign. But in many ways, this is a reflection that the love for liberty still is much alive in this country, and we should be optimistic. If we do the right things, it'll all turn out in the right way. I see ourselves in a difficult time where financially we cannot sustain a philosophy that has strayed from the founders. We now have a philosophy on our foreign policy of interventionism, where we believe that we can police the world, and we can get involved in nation building, and we can be the instructors of all goodness of the world, and if they don't listen to us, that we have to use force and we have to use war. And then at home we have the economic interventionism, which has committed ourselves not to self-reliance, but to that of welfarism and entitlements. And the entitlements, unfortunately, today have gravitated more to the powerful, rich corporate special interests rather than the people who probably much more so need it. But we, in many ways, are morally bankrupt and financially bankrupt. We can't afford it. So even those who say, no, it is our responsibility, we have to go around the world and do all these wonderful things. No, the poor people would never be taken care of unless the government took care of them from cradle to grave. The whole thing is if you run out of money and you run out of wealth, you can't take care of them anyway. And that's why we should argue the case for constitutional government, free markets, and individual liberty. When you look at it, we have a lot of problems, and you wonder how we can solve them. And I look at it rather simplistically, because each and every problem's almost, you can look and say, well, we got into this mess over here because we lacked respect for the rule of law. We went and did things that weren't permitted under the Constitution, and doing one so-called good thing creates two new problems. And the one good thing we intended to do really didn't work. Central economic planning doesn't work. And if there's ever been an example of the failure of central economic planning, just look at the efforts of the federal government taking care of a problem of a flood in New Orleans. It cost you and everybody else a lot of money, and now, guess what they've discovered? Over $500 million in checks were passed out to individuals who weren't even injured by the flood and the disaster. It doesn't work, and therefore our arguments for the marketplace and limited government and for the Constitution should be based on not only the theoretical but the practical and the moral. The practical is that socialism and welfarism, big government, just flat out doesn't work. The moral issue is that one individual or acting through government, they don't have the moral authority to tell other people how to live and how to run the economy and how to police the world. And fortunately for all of us who believe that, the Constitution defends that position. But we're getting at a point now where even if some still believed in that, we won't be able to afford it. And bankruptcy under our conditions today will come not so much that the government won't send out the money, they will always send out the checks. The big question that we have to face is, will the money they send buy anything? Ever since 1976, from my very first campaign, I have always talked about the monetary issue. And to me, I think it's a sleeper issue. Everywhere I go, and I'll bet you in this crowd too as well, you understand the money issue, and you're more interested in the money issue than anybody I can find in Washington, D.C. They do not understand, nor do they care how the Federal Reserve System works. But it might be a convenience for them. And certainly those who are in power and in the know are very supportive of the system that we have today. The politician generally likes to be reelected. They're interested in mainly reelection and power. So it's very good to go to pander to the people and say, what do you want? We will get you what you want. I will be your servant. I will go to Washington and I will be your errand boy and I will bring back the goods. And they do that and they do a very good job and they get reelected. And yet there's very little concern, a little bit of talk about paying the bills, but very little bit of concern, because if they come up short, they tax us to the maximum, then they borrow to the maximum, they still come up short. So what gimmick do they have? They have this little game they play, a very sinister, evil, immoral game of going to the Federal Reserve and saying, well, we need some more money. Would you create some money out of thin air? And they do. The Constitution is very, very clear. The founders went through runaway inflation with the continental dollar, and they put it in the Constitution. No central banks, only gold and silver as legal tender, and we ought to follow the law. And the law in regards to money means that you don't have a central bank. Jefferson got rid of a national bank, and Jackson got rid of a national bank, and if I am chosen to be president, we will get rid of the current national bank. And of course, we will want a proper sized government under the Constitution, which means that we have a very, very small government in Washington. And then it's very logical that we would change the tax code. And we would start by getting rid of the IRS and repealing the 16th Amendment. Those are a few minor things that we can deal with. And yet the overriding issue is that of liberty, the defense of liberty. The purpose of all political activity should be to guarantee and work for individual liberty. I see liberty as being individual because I believe each and every one of us come from, we get our lives from the Creator, and that's where our rights come from. And governments don't give us our rights. They have an obligation to make sure our neighbors don't take our rights and our lives from us. But the purpose of government ought to be to protect liberty. But once they embark on trying to make us personally better people and to make the world safe for democracy, which we've been doing ever since Woodrow Wilson, and making the economy fair, they embark on something that sounds good and it sounds like they are well motivated, and many of them may well be. But what they're doing is they're rejecting the principle that individuals have responsibility for themselves, and that solving these problems would be much better if it was left to the people. But every time government takes a certain responsibility away from us and puts the responsibility on government to do it, and they become the nanny state, they can't do that without taking away some of our freedoms. Why freedom is something to be admired and strive for is the fact that human mankind's, the goal should be that of each and every one of us to strive for excellence, to improve ourselves, and to strive for virtue, and pursue whatever religious beliefs that we have, absent any government control. And that can only be done under the conditions that were given us. The Constitution was far from a perfect document, but it happened to have been the best document ever devised as a contract between the people and the government. And we have thrived in this country. We have benefited. We still benefit. We still have great traditions. But the concern that all of us have now is that are the conditions altered? Have they been changed over these last 100 years? And they have. They haven't just disappeared in the last 4 or 6 years or with this administration. There's a steady erosion of what is happening. You can look at the foreign policy has changed for almost 100 years. You have the monetary policy since 1913, the income tax since 1913, the runaway welfare state since the Depression. So it's taken a long time. But we really have a significant erosion of those principles. And in the meantime, we have become very dependent. We have become borrowers. We aren't the producers and we aren't the loaners anymore. We do not lend to the world, we borrow from the world. And it's been a benefit to us on the short run, but not an advantage because we have become complacent and dependent. So today, we can't run our military and we can't have an entitlement system without borrowing almost $3 billion a day, and most of it coming from China. What an irony that our dependency is on China now. And where are our jobs going? To China and the Far East. So today, we're in much worse shape than we were in the 1970s. We had guns and butter in the 60s. We had the bad decade of the 70s, high inflation, unemployment, difficult times, nearly runaway inflation and difficult times with the dollar in 1979, 1980. Those conditions all still exist, but I believe they're a lot worse. The dollar bubble is much bigger. Our ability to produce, our car companies don't produce, and our steel companies are gone, and we depend on borrowing, and yet the entitlement system grows. So we elect conservatives to go in office. 1994, year 2000. So we finally get well, I should qualify that. The Republicans get in charge, and the neoconservatives take over, and they don't even believe the way we do. So they believe in entitlements. So if you understand where the neocons came from, they came from the left-wing part of the Democratic Party. But they believed in military adventurism. They believed in preemptive war and spreading by force our goodness. At the same time, they believed in entitlements. So that's their philosophy, and that's what we got. And now we have expanded our empire that we can't afford, and our efforts are becoming jeopardized. At the same time, we're up to about $70 trillion of entitlements that we have obligated for, and there's no way we can pay for it. This is the reason why I think young people are flocking to the campaign, because a lot of young people are waking up. And they say that young people aren't interested, and they're not interested in politics, and they don't vote. Well, I suspect they're getting to the point where they're starting to see the bills coming their way, that our generation has sort of dumped on them, and they're starting to realize it. So whether it's a loss of personal liberty, their personal privacy, and the attack proposed on the internet, the fact that they could be drafted, the selective service is still there, the war continues, and they know about this indebtedness, and they're wondering what's happening, and they want some straight answers. And they seem to accept the fact, when I talk to them, that we do have problems and we should deal with them, but I'm not going up there to get more stuff. You know, to hand out is not a freebie situation. We have to face up to our troubles, and that we can all survive and we can all do better if we know and understand how freedom works and how we have more prosperity. I am so convinced that freedom is the issue and that markets work, that it's absolutely the best humanitarian system. But yet we lose that argument. You know, those of us who talk about that, we get on the defensive and we say, oh, you're the ones who don't care about the poor people. You put poor people out on the streets, and you don't care about the people who suffer and the people who might be victims of other dictators, so you don't care. But the whole thing is that free markets and sound money produces great prosperity, but we have undermined that. Today, our government tells us, oh, you worry too much. There's no inflation, and the economy is doing well, and you know, there's no unemployment, and yet young people, middle-class people, many others, retired people are starting to feel the brunt of what we have. They say there's no inflation. Oh, if you count food and energy, oh yeah, inflation is a lot higher. Yeah, like nobody has to live or drive their car or pay doctor bills, you know. So There's a lot of skepticism. This is what I sense when I go around the country. A lot of skepticism, and people are looking for answers, and we do have the answers. Freedom does provide the answer. And it's literally available to us by following and having respect for the rule of law. And that's not so difficult. You know, we have the goals that we all may share in, but then we have the rule of law and how we get to those goals. I don't think there's ever any disagreement between conservatives, libertarians, and liberals on the ultimate goals. There are some who their goal is only power, but for the most part, most Americans want to do right and help people. But they don't understand economics, and they don't understand how liberty works. And that's what we need to encourage. We need to explain it to them. We have to understand ourselves so we can spread this message. And this is what I'm sensing, is that a lot more people are interested because they're starting to realize that we have these problems. It doesn't seem difficult for me to talk to no matter what crowd now, even the Republican crowds, but especially those who have become less Republican and more independent, and they're more constitutional, more conservative than they are loyalty to a party. So I can talk now about a foreign policy of non-interventionism and minding our own business and suggesting very strongly it's time to come home. And just think how much money we could save. There's an economic benefit. Not only do we get out of this mess and we don't have to lose 100 and some men every month, but we save a lot of money. If we had a different foreign policy, we could save literally hundreds of billions of dollars. If you add up everything that we do to maintain our empire, we're in 133 countries of the world, and it costs a lot of money to maintain the military, and the equipment is always being torn down and never up to par. We undermine our National Guard and our reserve units, and we take them away from our shores, and they're not here when we need them. We even take our border guards and send them over to Iraq to train border guards in Iraq while ignoring our own borders. It doesn't make any sense. So there's all those advantages, but the monetary issue of saving the money is tremendous. You could save $200, $300, $400 billion, as much as possible. Put a lot of that to the deficit, and then you can actually have more money for a transitional period for the people who would become totally dependent. Because although I have the belief that total free markets and the absence of all welfare is an ideal system, but it's not going to work overnight, and we have to have a plan to do this. Today, there are some cuts being proposed in Washington, but it's usually for somebody receiving some medical care someplace. It doesn't make any sense on what they attack. But you could save money and actually tide people over and still allow the young people to get out of Social Security and teach them to be self-reliant. Economic answers to this, and they say, well, that could be chaotic, but what we're doing is chaotic. Whether we stay in Iraq, it's chaotic. If we leave, there could be a mess over there, but it could go much better than any of us dreamed. Today, in Vietnam, we lost 60,000 men. The military approach didn't work. They have become westernized, they have been capitalized, we're over there investing money, we trade with them and travel back and forth, all because we finally got around to following the advice of the founders who said, don't fight, don't get involved in entangling alliance, don't get involved in internal affairs, talk with people and trade with them, and you'll become friends. That is amazing. The problem too often of those others take that position and say, well, you're un-American. You're un-American because you don't want to go and do good around the world. You don't want to support the troops. Well, just think, if we supported the Constitution, not many of our troops would have died in these last 4 years. You know, the issue of privacy is a major issue that I've dealt with for many, many years, and it has been systematically attacked in this country. And it's been much worse since 9/11. A lot of bills were proposed to further erode our individual medical and financial privacy, but it couldn't be passed because the people weren't frightened enough. 9/11 produced the conditions where these laws sailed through the Congress because people were fearful and they took advantage of it, and bills like the Patriot Act and other laws were passed. I was an absolute opponent to the Patriot Act. I think it ought to be repealed. The other issue that is moving along quickly, and hopefully our state legislatures will rebel, as many of them have, and that is to not participate in the Real ID National ID card. It is said that the National ID card and that program is designed for illegals, illegal aliens, but you know better, because there's no way they can have an ID card for somebody who is illegal, who looks illegal, or looks like you, because everybody's going to have to carry their papers in order to move about the country. And that is just a movement toward totalitarianism, where we can't have freedom of movement, and we're scared of our own shadows. This whole idea that we have no privacy is virtually here. Last week, we had a bill come up under suspension, immediately, no warning. It was the first bill on the House floor. Fortunately, my staff got hold of it. And it was one of the bills proposed by McCarthy of New York, who's a real gun grabber. And it came out of that incident in Virginia, you know, when the students were killed. That's always another opportunity. And sometimes I even smile, another opportunity. And so they wrote this gun bill. And unfortunately, it was supported by the NRA, all the Republicans, all the Democrats, and it said, what we need is a bigger data bank so that when you are screened for whether or not you can own a gun, that you go through this national database to find out what kind of medical treatment you ever had and what kind of trouble, what kind of misdemeanors you've had. And we'll all go to a national data bank. And I was astounded that there was so much support even from the NRA. Gun Owners of America strongly opposed it. It's just an example of how people want to do good and they do harm. And once again, it was an attack on privacy. Another database going on into Washington. And they talk about, you know, mental instability. They want to make sure that you're in the database. But just think now, and I imagine a lot of you have heard of this move in Washington, and I've worked hard at opposing, but have not been successful, and that's compulsory mental health testing for every single kid in public schools. That's an outrage. Just think of, though, when they do that, and they label some kid. Of course, they've had some trial programs, and it looks like they're putting 10% of them on medication, you know, to quiet them down for the teacher's benefit, this sort of thing. But can you imagine putting that on the medical record and being permanent in the federal government, and then the government's in collusion with the insurance company? All of a sudden, you know, difficulty getting insurance, difficulty buying a gun. It'll probably be in your Real ID, in the microchip. These are the kind of things that all of us are concerned about, but fortunately and encouragingly, young people don't like that either. They like to be left alone. And of course, everybody likes the idea that I'm a strong protector of the internet, because I protect privacy. I don't want the internet to be taxed, and I don't want the internet to be regulated. Now, this is a risky political position, because immediately people say, well, don't you know there's some nasty things out there on the internet? Yeah, like television, too. And like the book, and like newspapers. You know, a lot of nasty things out there. But you know, it's back to who's responsible? And are we responsible for ourselves? Are we responsible for our children? And technology can help us monitor the internet. And of course, we ought to be monitoring our children as well. And so there are answers, but of course what they would like to say is, oh, you don't care about protecting children against pornography, you know, and that's what they'll use against you. But I don't think it's that difficult. That was used against me in the last campaign, and it really didn't hurt. So people are open when they realize you don't want to curtail people's freedom of expression, because if they can, they might want to curtail our freedom of expression in our religious views as well. But just think of the harm done by the freedom of expression of political ideas. Now that's what's really caused harm to the world. So to me, there's a lot of problems. I'm very much energized with what is happening and very encouraged. And I do not fear that problems will ever get as bad as what happened in the Soviet system. Their empire collapsed because they ran out of money and because socialism doesn't work. And yet they had a great deal of difficulties because they did not have the traditions that we have. They did not have the respect for private property and contracts and sound money. So we will meet these difficulties, but our job as individuals and campaigners and everybody working in the freedom movement is to make sure there are more people involved, so that when we come to a crisis, we pray that we can avoid the crisis. But if we have the crisis, that we know where we came from, and we know what is good, and we know what the rule of law is, and pick up where the founders started. For instance, the gold standard was much better than the paper standard. But there's a better gold standard than the one we used to have. So that all of this, we can make progress. The history of freedom is very, very young. A couple hundred years old, really. And yet, we're rejecting that experiment that we have been blessed with. And our efforts should be designed not to give up on that, not to drift back. They'll say, you want it to be. They'll say, you want to go back to this and back to this. Yeah, you would be a good candidate in the 19th century. But what they're not realizing is that they are candidates for 6,000 years of tyranny. So it is up to us. We have a responsibility upon our shoulders, especially now that we are informed and you are informed and you know what is right and good. To sit back or leave and desert the cause would be very detrimental. There's more responsibility on all of us who know and understand the issues, because we have to deliver that message. And you have been very helpful. Continue to be in the fight. I have no idea whatsoever what will happen in this campaign. I was reluctant at the beginning. It's doing better than ever before. I don't know what will happen tomorrow. All I know is I have a responsibility, and I am so delighted to meet with people like you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And we're going to take a couple questions.
Yeah, what's your stand on the amnesty bill and the North American Union?
Yes. Somebody asked me, if they ever asked me about the North American Union in the debate, would I give a clear-cut answer? And I said, I bet I would. Like, no North American Union. No NAFTA highway. But the Security and Prosperity Partnership has been the plan. It was institutionalized in April of 2005 by the Presidents of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. The plan is on paper. We know it's there. They're talking about a North American Union with a currency called the Amero. And this is the reason that they're weak on border protection, because they really don't believe in border protection. And you know, I am really, like I described, in the foreign policy, I want to engage people. I want to be able to travel. I want to trade with people and be friends with people. I want to bring the military home. But that's not their goal. That's not their ideas of globalism. Their idea of globalism is having a single currency, which is not gold. Their idea of a single currency is under the United Nations, where the United Nations are taxing us and regulating us. And this is a system that we have to challenge. But that is why they're weak on borders, and they're moving in that direction. And if you look and see that a significant number of other candidates happen to belong to the CFR and the Trilateral Commission, and that's where a lot of the plans are laid out. And they're not secretive and conspiratorial. They're very much up in the open, which means they're bolder than ever before. So it wasn't too long ago, not the current president, but a previous president said why we had to do A, B, and C and have the WTO is we had to implement the New World Order. We need to reject that order. We like the old American system.
As, I guess, the token young guy here, it's possible to ask a question that's more oriented like that. Education doesn't come up in the debates very often, if any. What would you do to combat tuition going through
The education, our educational system.
Yeah.
What would I do to combat the educational system? Well, we've gone the wrong direction. There's no authority in the Constitution for the federal government to say anything about public school education. So until you can change that and eliminate the Department of Education, we should work quickly to give people the right and the tax advantage to get out of the system. Which means that even if you have children in public school and you have additional education, or if you have them in homeschooling or in private schooling, then you can get all your expenses back off your taxes in tax credits. Ultimately, though, my idea of education, and I believe this from a religious and a political viewpoint, is education should be the responsibility of the parents. And if you're going to have public schools, and we've had them for a long time, it should be as local as possible. Even the state government can mess up a public school system. The town can have a school system. That's what the kind of system that I was in as a kid. And it was pretty uniform community, but there was Bible reading and prayers in school, and which are really legal under the Constitution, because we're advised in Washington, write no law regarding the free expression of religion, so you should have the right to say prayers wherever.
Some people say in the debates and after the debates that you don't understand the military. You weren't in the military. Were you in the military? And if you were, can you describe your service a little bit for us?
You know, one individual, and I won't say his name, but he challenged me in the debate over the Iraq War. I think he took 4 or 5 deferments and did not serve. Now, I believe in the volunteer army. I don't believe in the draft. I don't believe in the selective service. But I also believe that to change things, I believe in changing, the government, and that's why I ended up, running for office. But in 1962, there was a Cuban crisis, and I was in my second year of my internal medicine residency, and I was off season, so I was finishing at the end of December, and I did get to finish my second year, but I was called to duty. And I got this notice, and I tell this to all my veterans group, because they like to know whether you've served or not. And I said, yeah, I volunteered. I served in the military, and I was in for 5 years. Then I said, well, I have to tell you the truth. I got this draft notice, and it said that you will be drafted in the Army as a buck private unless you want to volunteer and get a commission, you be a captain, and be a doctor. I said, I'm a volunteer. So I made the best of it. It was an interruption in my medical training. I made the best of it and got along quite fine, and stayed in and got back on a cycle for my training. I stayed in active duty 2.5 years, and then I was in the Air National Guard for 2.5 years. So I know a little bit about it, and people ask me, did you have the same views about foreign policy and politics back then? And I said, no, I was still studying. And I was still reading and trying to figure it all out. I told one person earlier this evening that when I was in high school, one of my teachers was called back to duty after World War II. He was sent to Korea, and he was killed. And that was a real eye-opener for me. So that and the Vietnam War and having served, it helped formulate my views, and did a lot of reading and studying until also in economics, my instincts were free market capitalism. But in the foreign policy, my instincts were protect America and mind our own business. And what I found was when I found other people that I could read and study, it would give me reassurance. You know, when I discovered Austrian economics, I said, wow, these people are smart, you know, and they can explain this so much better, and I was more comfortable. So that's what I was doing in the 60s. So I did end up with a little bit of experience in military.
I know you said in your first week of office you would abolish the IRS, and kudos to you for not only saying that, but to do it. But realistically, since things don't happen overnight, what is like the time frame for the IRS to be phased out?
And that's really the proper question. I said I'd get rid of the IRS in the first week, which was to make it dramatic and let everybody know exactly where I stood. But I actually, even when I answered that, I followed up with it, that nothing really happens until the American people change their attitude about what they think the role of government ought to be. Because as long as they want the nanny state, and as long as they want to police the world, you're going to have high taxation. And of course you can't get rid of it in a week. But the tax code is complicated for a purpose, to serve special interests. People get certain benefits. So no, you're not going to reduce the size of government overnight, and it's going to take a while. But if the people support it, either gradually or with a crisis where you can do it more direct. But it is going to be difficult. But if you try to collect enough taxes without an income tax to balance the budget, you wouldn't be very happy. You'd probably have a sales tax of about 40% or something. But that wouldn't be all that bad. That would certainly be a boost to the underground economy, you know, if you have this huge taxation. But it's how much dependency we want on the government. But it would take some time to do it.
Would you be in favor of a flat tax?
I would do, my promise to my constituents has always been, I'll never vote to raise taxes, I'll always vote to lower taxes, and I'll do whatever I can to get rid of the IRS. Now, either way, even with the sales tax, you have to have some collecting agency, so you always have the authorities. And I keep emphasizing, it's spending. Spending is the equation you have to deal with. A flat tax, I guess if they enforced it, it would be slightly better. You know, we could save some money in filling out these forms. But I don't look to the flat tax or the sales tax as a panacea if we don't deal with the spending side of the equation.
Ron, could you comment on all the media that are attending today and your feeling about how the press is covering your campaign?
Well, I'm not even sure the media is here today. No, they're not. No, it's very interesting. You know, last night we had, up in Kansas City, we had over 700 people show up at a rally. And but there was no media. Today, I had an interview on Fox, and also there was an article on the front page of the Washington Post dealing with the internet, the excitement on the internet. So we're making slow progress there, and but there seems to be some exclusion, and I don't lose sleep over it. I have enough other things to think about. I'm trying to keep up with current events and all these other things. But I just expect it to happen. That's the way it worked. They're part of the establishment. But they will be overwhelmed when the people wake up. Thank you very much.